Nice to see you all again. We're live on SBC Online, and we're here to talk about research today, which I'm really excited about. We have a couple amazing guests. Heather Wray is going to join us to talk about publications and the literature review of what's going on in the research space with smart buildings. And then we're joined by Sophie Schuller from Cushman and Wakefield, who's just diving deep into all kinds of interesting stuff. So I'm really excited to dive into that.
Yeah, so we kind of have like the full spectrum a little bit. I mean, Heather is, well, she's a doctor, but she's one of the original kind of sustainability engineers. If you look at what she did in Toronto, I don't want, I think it was almost 20 years ago, still up and running, changed the way that we looked at rooftops, really looking at different things. She's now doing amazing research and patents, and she's kind of doing that. Sophie is a neuroscientist doing her PhD on just kind of the amazing way the brain works and looking at what we can do within places. So I feel like we've got, and then me, in the middle there.
The mad
Biomedical engineering,
well.
Weirdo mad scientist. So I'm really excited to have these women talking about what we can do with research, because they've certainly shown what we can do with research.
Absolutely. And I think it's good to preface where this all came from, right? The Smart Building certification, the Smart Building Collective, was founded in science, refined in practice, and it's constantly optimized by our network of experts. That's something that we really take very, very seriously. And it came about because you were doing some amazing research in offices with the likes of CBRE and Booking.com and other big parties. And it was extremely complicated to be able to do research. It was extremely challenging. It was also very expensive to fit out a space with a living lab and technology to make that happen. So we said, where is there a network of buildings, a standard smart approach that we could plug into and do research more effectively?
Well, and it comes, I guess that's what we're going to talk about today. Like, why do we do research? And was it expensive for what those companies did with it? I would say no. What they found out for the budget they put together was astronomically a huge savings and efficiency. But I'm going to let our researchers talk.
Okay, well, what we've done with a couple of the other talks is we've gone through a little bit of the smart building ecosystem, the Smart Building Collective ecosystem first, to explain to you exactly how we're setting this up to make it more effective. And let me see if I can progress my slides in an effective way. But we're really here with the mission of helping people and organizations navigate and change the relationship between humans and buildings through data and technology for the improvement of the environment, people's lives, efficiencies, and economic results. And what you see there is it's not about putting as many certifications on as many buildings as possible. That's not what we're here for. What we're here for is to transform real estate. We had I advise you to go to our last session, which was Why Certify, where we were interviewing a couple of our buildings. And we asked them the question, why did you build a smart building? And we loved their answers because both of them said it was not the mission in itself. What they set out to do was build the best building they possibly could. And when they were done, it just happened to be smart. And they wanted to benchmark that. Very smart. Good addition. So definitely check that video out. Anders and Martin, they really praised us with all kinds of cool insights. And yeah, definitely check it out. But that's what it's about. It's about changing real estate. And I think that the research ecosystem today, the three researchers who are speaking, they can speak to that mission as well. But our ecosystem is really shaped up to tackle this from many, many different angles. So we have our buildings that are being certified, and to us, that's just the nicest, biggest network of living lab you could possibly imagine, right? Now that we have buildings that are open to research, have data, we can plug in and do amazing research. We have technical partners and consultancy partners. They also have a wealth of knowledge and data and interesting insights. So they're also completely inclined to do research with us. And then we have our academy, of course, our assessors and our APs that are individuals who are willing to jump in. And all of this is driven by the SBC framework. That gives us the language that allows all of these different pieces, buildings, partners, and research to speak together. And that's really, really exciting. But we want to talk about research real quick, and then I'm going to hand it over to you to interview these amazing ladies. But the way we see it is that the building network gives us the ability to do research more effectively and on larger scale, and not reinvent the wheel every time. We don't have to build a living lab every time we want to do a research. We should be plugging research into the networks of buildings that already exist. So that's very much from the building perspective. So if you certify your building with us, you can be part of this and have researchers work with you and publish cool papers and conferences and that kind of stuff. So that's really exciting. Partners and advisors, the tech partners that we work with, they're also in tons of buildings, and they have a lot of really cool insights based on technology. And one of the things that we're doing with our partners is, if you, for instance, have multiple buildings that have a B grid in it, or a spectral or a Bisner type solution, then we have a network of living labs, right? We can actually have unified data and study things based on different organizations, different use cases, these types of things. So that's the partners is a huge component to this research piece. We're born out of academia, so we work with lots of universities, professors, and students around the world. And a lot of their challenge is, where do I have data? Where do I have people? Where do I have organizations that I can plug my research into? And so we really want to be a use case for that. We want to provide that mechanism for these researchers to be able to do research more effectively. And that's just really, really exciting to be there. It was always the mission, but now we have a very strong foundation, and we have a lot of really beautiful things happening in the space. So,
well, it's exciting, right? I mean, what industry has a more diverse stakeholder collection than smart buildings right now? I mean, everybody is involved because we're all operating in them. We're investing in that. That we have so many stakeholders. So we can either be really siloed in all this, or we can work together and make huge advances quite quickly, which is what we always say. We're passionate and impatient, so we're ready to change things for the better.
Yeah, nice. I'm absolutely. Oh, this is going through it. Yeah. And like we said, SBC was born out of the need to bring education, knowledge sharing, and academic research into a more practical and cost-effective way. And I'm not going to steal the thunder, but we just hosted our first academic conference, academic workshop with conference, and I think the results were amazing.
Yeah.
But I'll let you guys talk about that in a moment. So, how we see the research ecosystem specifically, right? Because we're doing certifications. Certification is about telling the story of your building. It's also about drilling down and figuring out how to improve it. We have our partner ecosystem, but we also have what we call the research ecosystem. And what do we mean by that? Well, the research ecosystem is all about matchmaking of buildings, partners, and researchers to be able to do research more effectively, doing it scientific, making sure that we're using scientific models and working in academic, but also market research is really interesting. What's going on? What are the trends? What can we learn? And I think that was the most brilliant thing as well from the Why Certify event, was they said one of the best things is actually traveling around and seeing what is going on and being able to improve based on the collective knowledge. And from that research, we create academic events. We have calls for papers. We do workshops and try and get that knowledge out into the public best we can.
Yeah, we just hosted, a month ago, a workshop in Boston that Sophie was a part of, and Heather. That was just this amazing blend of practical and academic. And everybody learned from everybody, and I think it was just a really exciting time.
And with that, I am going to hand over to you to talk about research with these lovely ladies. I'll invite Sophie onto the stage with you, and I will bid you all farewell. I'll be back in a bit for closing remarks and questions.
Thanks for the intro, Nicholas.
Hello.
Hello. So I'm really excited to have a discussion. We want to talk about a couple of things, and I think maybe we start with living labs because we're in your living lab today. Yes. We're visiting, and Heather's worked in a lot of living labs. I've worked in a lot of living labs. So what is a living lab, for starters?
Yeah, well, that also sounds like a very simple question to ask with a simple answer, but it's, in my experience, not. But essentially for us, a living lab is any type of environment that is focused on co-creation, co-research, with a continuous improvement focus. So what we're really interested in here is understanding what really happens when we go to work. We're particularly interested in that from a data and evidence-based perspective, using objective measures, whether that's smart technology. With my background in neuroscience and neuropsychology, we're interested in looking at things like brainwaves and autonomic response in space. But the objective to do that is to understand the base of what really happens when we are working, what happens when we go to work, and then to share that within our work community here, but across broader communities, research communities, commercial practice communities, so that we can gather as much information as possible from our results and continuously improve. We can see small things. And we think, for example, in this space, we design quiet meeting rooms where people can concentrate. Okay, do they really concentrate in that space? Let's test it. You know, what is the scientific or the neurological definition of concentration? And, you know, maybe I can't answer all those questions, but if I share it with a broader scientific community, I bet they could.
Okay, and then application, because you know, sometimes people think research kind of is this exercise that researchers love to do because we're crazy curious people and we like to find things out. But application, can we talk about some things? Do you have an example of something? I don't know if you can share. Please.
Definitely, yeah.
But was there something that you discovered where it was kind of an aha moment and the application just that came together?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing that I would say is I don't know any organization. We're a professional services organization, so our product is to advise organizations. So in a way, researching and evaluating our product is a core part of what we sell. So for example, I mean, if we're advising people on return to work, I mean, we better make sure that we understand what is work, what is a return, what are people's sentiments around returning, et cetera, et cetera. So in a way, I see this as almost product development. Yeah. And I'm very lucky to work for an organization that agrees with that. And then from a commercial perspective, research plays two roles in my mind. Number one, it's going to reinforce the advice that you're already giving. Or number two, it's going to completely dispel the advice that you have been giving. And I think that both of those hold equal amounts of value, not just for the academic community, but also for industrial communities and commercial communities. So to give an example of that, we have been undertaking a piece of research using a statistical method called organizational network analysis. So that looks at taking metadata, which is people's emails, telephone calls, team chats, electronic communications, where we see that Sophie spoke to Elizabeth and then they had a meeting 2 days later and then other people joined. And that has created a picture of communication and connection across an organization. In this environment, in this office here in Utrecht, our living lab, we previously answered the question, who should sit next to who, by asking people, who do you collaborate with most? And finance sit next to HR, and office agency sit next to asset services, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how we formed zoning within our office space. When we looked at organizational network analysis, for example, we see actually these aren't the people that you work with every day. These are the people that you might like to work with or that you remember working with every day. But actually there are very different clusters that have nothing to do with kind of structural hierarchy in organizations. The implication of that is if we sit these people closer together, does that generate more innovation? Does that have a greater impact on productivity? Are we able to innovate more in a commercial sense? So just that's a little example of how we're using, if you like, research in practice to change the advice that we're giving ourselves as well as our clients.
That's super interesting. I love that. I think one of the things that comes up a lot with living labs is why should we spend money? Like Nicholas said, it's expensive to put a living lab together. But we've done living labs like the Booking.com living lab that was expensive for what it was, but it informed their campus, which by comparison is very much a drop in the bucket, and really changed the way that they looked at their space and how people experienced it. So why do we, is it expensive? Why do you do something on that scale?
Yeah. Well, I guess I would answer that in two ways. The first one would be to say, can you afford not to? And as long as I've been at work for the last 18 years, I mean, there's been this like holy grail of a business case that takes into consideration the can you afford not to scenario, which always involves people's health, people's well-being, people's experience at work, perhaps even their productivity, etc. But slightly more intangible things that have been hard to quantify in a way that you could put a dollar amount to. I think that situation is getting less and less, actually, and especially post-COVID, where we see across the industry there's this growing importance of health and well-being. More people are putting in more quantifiable measures to be able to evidence, okay, if you don't do this, if you don't create spaces that are enabling for people to come and enjoy their experience at work in a healthy and productive way, they're going to leave. That costs you 40% of their annual salary every time you have to recruit them. And the worst thing is if they don't leave and a reduction in productivity means that they stay and you keep paying their salary, but they're not outputting. So that's a bit of a complicated answer, but I would say that we're getting more sophisticated at being able to quantify the previously unquantifiable, which means that if you put it in a business case, the investment in things like smart technology and maybe researchers' time is minimal in comparison to savings and the you will get in a fixed dollar amount. That doesn't even touch the reputational or experiential aspect of savings that you will also enjoy as a result of that.
Well, and I feel like, and as a researcher, of course, I love this, but I feel like we're moving away from this idea of we're doing this because so-and-so said so.
Yeah.
Like everything that we do needs to be informed by some sort of data. And we're also at this beautiful point in history where we're kind of acknowledging that people are complicated.
Yes.
And as a neuroscientist, I think you know a lot more about that than I do. But saying, okay, we can't have a cookie cutter set up for everybody.
Right.
And maybe that's really great and interesting. And maybe we'll get a lot more out of people if we're not trying to force them into a position there. This is my cookie cutter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just kind of a super exciting time.
Definitely. I also think as well, like, traditional organizational management has meant, let's put in, and this is going to sound rude and I don't mean it to, but let's put in the minimal amount of effort to organize and operationalize the maximum amount of people. And we used to do that just by saying, here's a group of employees. And then we differentiated it with, here's some really senior employees and here's some not so senior employees. And I feel like at this stage of smart building technology, or just a greater appreciation of the impact of architecture on human health and performance, what we're now trying to do is figure out, like, well, what's the next level down in groups? So how do men and women respond differently in workplace environments? How do people with different levels of disability, whether that's situational, whether that's permanent disability? How about people who are highly sensitive or have certain types of personality traits or do certain types of work functions? Really, for me, what we're trying to do is understand our product better, the product being work and workplace for me in my organization. And we're trying to do that at a one level down, or maybe even two level downs, in understanding people better. And it's not about creating an individualistic experience so that everyone is just so hopped up on their own individual environment. That's completely unrealistic when you come to sharing a space with a big group of people. But at least having the data to understand where is it going wrong for who, where could it be better for who and why, so that you can make informed choices. That's the basis, to be honest, of everything that we do here. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. And I think that's a perfect intro to Heather, talking about data. And please also jump in if you have a question for her. But okay, looking at data, I wanted to talk specifically with Heather, of course, about living labs, but also doing research, actually publishing. This sometimes can become such a we've hosted a workshop. It was very practical and academic. It was a great combination. We joined a conference in Nice where we had one of our very smart buildings, Hathon, open up their data to the academic population. It was like Christmas morning for academics. I've never seen so many academics rush the stage. So would like to open up your building to academics and have that experience. It's quite a novel experience, I think. But looking at how do you implement academic research with smart buildings and talking about it. One of the reasons that I think Heather is so powerful as well is she's such a great communicator, whether it's academic writing or it's practical writing. And I'm just making your intro really broad right now, so I'll get specific. Is publishing and working with real academic research just so complicated and impossible for businesses to do? Or is it something that we need to come closer together in the future and something very doable?
I think it's very doable, of course. And I think it's necessary as well. And again, this is kind of where the collective or this collaboration between different stakeholders is so important, because you need a building, you need the data, you need the people in the building, and then you need the academics or the researchers or the experts who know how to design those experiments and what to do with that data to pull out trends or to measure, quantify, or qualify impacts in a scientifically sound way. So it can be possible. I mean, historically, it is a very difficult thing to do, and that's because they're not necessarily sitting in the same room together, like you were saying in Nice, where you had somebody who had a building and then the academics who need the data from the building. Like, they usually don't cross paths like that, right? So that's really the power of having a collective group of people or different stakeholders who are willing to work together. So it's not impossible by any means, and I think most people are willing to collaborate. It's just doing a bit of matchmaking and finding common goals. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And then in terms of, I think the academic community is moving much more, moving more towards, we have our open access revolution that's coming, where for those who don't know, universities are paying these journals so that no one else has to pay for them. Basically saying, usually for an academic paper, you read the abstract, you think it's the perfect paper, and you pay for it, and then you realize it's got some stuff you need, but it's not the dream that you thought it was. And and this is where you can actually just have the paper, read the paper. It's an open access. And then I think with this idea of having these buildings have so much data and have people in them as well who are interacting, this idea that it really is coming together in a way that we can talk about it, and making things a little bit just more of a common language and open the accessibility, if that makes sense.
Yeah, agreed. So yeah, a lot of academic studies are behind a paywall or just are never published. They might be sitting in a thesis or something somewhere on a library shelf. And so it is important to publish, and it's important to publish open access so that everyone has access to your results and to your research. Also, you can publish your data sets now as well. So that's a trend I'm also seeing. And then, yeah, it can be a bit difficult sometimes. So there might be a bit of a barrier there. So then what you also need are people who can translate those results into action or into a more common language, or into a language that people understand, or maybe it's what you're measuring impacts that's resonating with people. So maybe somebody's really focused on economic impacts, and so you really get it down to a dollar value. Or maybe it's translating some of those social or environmental impacts that Sophie was talking about into a dollar value that people can understand better. So that might be one way, or just the language itself, or there's different avenues to publish. It doesn't always have to be an academic paper. It could be a blog post or a white paper or a workshop or a presentation. There's all different ways to disseminate that research. It just depends on the audience. So it's really about knowing who the target audience is and then tailoring the message and the core story and what you found in your research to that audience. And that's something that I think academics struggle with sometimes. So yeah, that's an important step, of course.
Yeah, and I was going to ask actually, because I think one of the big challenges is also, in a way, academics like to study something very small and specific, and from a scientific perspective, it has to be very controlled in a very deep way. But organizations kind of want to study something like something small for the maximum amount of impact. So in your experience, there's this kind of, we come from two different worlds in a way. What kind of advice would you have, or have you seen any great examples of where you merge those two worlds? And is it an education thing that needs to happen between both groups, if you like, or both populations, to understand one another's environments to make sure that that's a really successful match? Yeah, I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of sort of pre-planning and understanding expectations and what each party wants to get out of it, because it might be a bit different, and coming to some very, very clear objectives and scope for a study before it's undertaken. I think that's really important. And I think for smart buildings, we can take some good examples from studies of green buildings. There were some very interesting studies done for years now, of course, about green buildings, and specifically about the impact of green buildings. So those could be maybe used as a guide for how we frame studies, or as a sort of a point to look at to say, oh, would this be of interest in terms of impact on people or carbon emissions or things like that. So that would be the first place that I would say, that would be the first place that I would go look, is at existing studies on green buildings to see how they were structured and how we could use that as a model maybe for some smart building studies.
Yeah. And that expectation, I think, is really important, because I've also worked with computer scientists who say, this is what I want to publish in, and this is what I'm doing. But if you need calculations, that's super easy for me, and I can give you some data, and that's fine for this. So I work with a lot of universities now that says, this is what I'm going to publish, but I will do this practical part for you. And I think that's kind of what's really nice. And, you know, like Heather said, some things are better suited for a white paper, where you really want to disseminate information and talk about the grand population. And some things are very academic, but some things are a little bit more broad. We did a conference last month where we had a 4-page conference paper that was just, it was something that we could put together. We spoke about it. We did some, we had a few different points of, disseminating the information. And it was just the kind of, I think it's this great, not hybrid totally, but sort of hybrid of the two worlds, where it's something that you can digest, it's something you can read, it doesn't take forever to put together. It's just a nice nugget of contribution to the academic community and the practical community.
Yeah. So, I think that's also a really key point, to be honest, because I think science can be really scary to lots of people if you don't come from a scientific background. And I know just in my experience at Cushman, when I start talking about like, let's evaluate like the neural correlates of EEG and sustained attention, people are like, what? Say what now? That's my current voting about it this morning. But if you can explain in a way what you mean by that, in a way that's not scientific, people will get it. So actually what I want to test is, the spaces that we design to help concentration, do they really help concentration as measured by our brains? Yeah. And I think there is maybe, this reticence for organizations, I don't know whether you find this, Heather, to get involved in scientific research. I mean, focus groups are also scientific research. Qualitative research is also scientific research in a way. There's a space for everyone to be able to collaborate in this common goal of just trying to understand a bit more. And I think that's one of the things that I really try to do, is to dispel this idea that, somehow scientific research involves test tubes and, white coats. It doesn't have to, especially not in this environment. I mean, I love it when it does, but so do you.
Well, and I think it's just a little bit of history that we're trying to erase. I think there was this idea that academics came in, they got what they needed, and they left. Yeah. And also we have that with big data. We're collecting big data, and you never knew what they found out, and then people have kind of a nervous reaction sometimes. Oh, they must have found out something bad. That's why they're not telling us. So this idea that we come in, we share what we found. We share it in a way, we collect things that are applicable, that are interesting for people, that are helpful for people. And publishing is also getting more applicable. I think there's a lot of journals that are changing the way that they're approaching. There's a lot of conferences that are really changing the way that they're, and just a refreshing kind of take on this, which is exciting for us as a collective to talk about de-siloing and working together. But also, like Heather said, matchmaking people who desperately need each other to do something amazing. So.
And do you see that? Do you see it changing? Like, because my experience kind of previously in academia is more like, I publish to show you how amazing my research is. Do you see that kind of feeling changing a little bit to be more like, I'm publishing so that you can help me solve this puzzle? Like, this is one piece of a 10-point plan or a 100-point plan or a 1,000,000-point plan. Do you see that the kind of collaboration environment is also increasing in terms of publication?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it depends on the field. So I tend to work very much in applied sciences. And so I really want to be focused on impact, and I really want to come up with solutions for some sticky problems. And I do think part of that is publishing. And of course, when you're working with industry or stakeholders who have the potential to make a big impact with some small changes, then it's important to publish. And I think more and more people are recognizing that there's a lot of value in that, and more focus, I think, on impact, because we've set some pretty lofty goals in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, for example. But also you see a lot more, especially with the European Union, towards like better industry and people and work environments and stuff, especially with COVID. And so people are just more aware of that, and I think want to do more to try to meet some of those targets.
Yeah, love that. And also, like Heather talked about, sharing data sets or helping data sets build up on each other. Always, I think academics play their part in it, and suggesting future research. We were talking about my current paper, saying, I think you'll do really well if you look into this area, adding to this research. So we're, I think I'm getting the time. No.
I'm here. I do have one question for you guys. Hi, I'm back. I don't know if you can see me.
Come join. We'll scooch over.
So Heather, we've also been doing quite a literature review on what exists in the smart building space. So I think this is a question for Heather, but also for you, because I think you guys have done, just walking around the Living Lab here, incredible. You guys have done so many different research pieces and uncovered all kinds of insights, but I don't think you publish on every single one of those, right? No. So how are we doing from a publishing perspective across the board for smart buildings? And how do we do that more effectively together? Because in essence, you guys are kind of reinventing the wheel then many times, because you're not actually accessing that collective consciousness already. Yeah. So maybe start with you, Heather, what you've uncovered.
I haven't seen too much, to be honest. I think the literature is pretty lacking. It's a lot of maybe a very specific, if it's the scientific stuff that really quantifies things is usually very specifically focused on a technology and a building or something like that, which is fine. But in terms of broader discussions or measurements or quantification or qualification of impacts of smart buildings, there's really not a lot there. So there's a real opportunity to fill that gap. That's what I've noticed.
Yeah, and I think for all those that are part of the collective, that opportunity to fill that gap immediately puts you as the thought leader in that space, right? If you are able to realize a research project that gives that publication body, that's going to be quite amazing, I think. And how does that work more practically as far as how you guys do research?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I experience it a little bit like drinking from the fire hydrant. We have so much data that actually we can't process it all. So that's why I think Smart Building Collective is so valuable. It's not that we don't want to, or we just have so much data, where to start in a way. So I think for us, it's about connecting with organizations such as yourselves and with scientific professionals like Heather, to help us, you know, to say we've got this. We're interested right now in looking at this specific element, but help yourself, guys. you eat the rest, and what you find, come back. And in a way, as a result of that, you're able to connect it to other organizations, and from that, we create an ecosystem of co-learning. We actually have not just a living lab, but like a living lab city.
Well, and I think what's really interesting, and I'm looking, you know, a step further, 2 steps further now, is that there are tech parties that we are already partnered with, and ones that are coming, that are doing incredible things to disseminate, you know, insight from this data and this information. And nobody's looking for more information or more knowledge. There's plenty of that. What they're looking for is wisdom and insight amongst the haystack. And I think there's going to be some really smart solutions. And if we can plug into that as a collective, I think we have some exciting things to realize together.
Yeah, and like we said before, there's so many different ways to do it. So we are going to be doing more white papers, more blogs, more conference, more workshops, more academic papers or conference papers, and they're all different sizes. So there's a plate size for everyone.
And I do have to say, like the conference that we recently did with BuildSys 2022, which I'm sure we're going to do 2023 as well. I don't know if you've ever been to an academic conference. For our researchers, they definitely have. But what was different about this one was that we really blended the practical with the academic. And I've gotten so many positive feedbacks from that experience. And actually, a lot of the practical are already partnering up with the academics and doing research. So it speaks to me of the power of what is happening here. So
and that it's not scarce. You know, what they're looking for isn't scarce. They just don't have introductions.
Right.
So it's just about finding the person that you or the organization that you need to do something incredible. Yeah.
I think that's all from me. Do you all have closing remarks?
I am just really excited to work with such amazing female scientists. And like I said, you know, looking at what Heather did 20 years ago in Toronto, and I think I got the date on that right, and what Sophie's doing now, and also what Heather's doing now, I think it's really inspiring. And I think what we can do together is, I don't know.
Well, and to be honest, you know, when we put this out as a proposition to the buildings, all of them are just hands down, let's do it. Let's go. Meaning they're curious and they're interested and they want to push the needle forward as well. Which, that was the design, you know. Then you have a living lab of, you know, umpteen buildings that are just ready to do some really cool stuff together.
And all of the universities are really proud of the suggestions they can make. They said, we can help you with this. We will put together, we'll take you through the results, we'll say what we suggest. They're proud of their consultative experience and what they can do when they find research, which I think is not always expected. So I think it's just, the potential is enormous, and we're excited about it. I'm very excited.
And you, do you have any closing remarks?
No, only, well, I'd love to ask actually Heather and Elizabeth a question, but I feel like I'm the kind of baby in the group. I'm just starting out my PhD journey, and I think one of the most powerful things is these types of get-togethers where you think you're the only one that's weird enough to be interested in, like, how architecture impacts human health and performance, or how smart building technology can kind of fuel the energy transition. They're so specific small things that you think kind of you're some strange person, but actually one of the biggest blessings of these types of things is finding your tribe in a way, and the power that comes with finding that tribe is, for me, huge. I mean, both professionally, both from a research perspective, but also personally, you know, with yourself and Heather helping me so much in my research. So I think for me that's a really important feature of these types of things. But my question to you guys was, have you read anything, or are you writing anything that's super interesting that people who are listening, I would just never know about? Like what kind of weird stuff are you looking at right now that's actually really cool?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Well, Heather is becoming an adventurer, so she's getting into that. But I'll let her answer for herself. I am doing I'm doing some research, which I haven't submitted yet, but having to do with how we interact with technology as kind of within cyborg theory, and how we and one of the questions that came out of my research but was not answered by my research, but it kind of is the next step, is are there different levels of being kind of that cyborg, that interaction with technology? Do we have people who can really benefit from technology, and people who need to be kind of kept away from it? And what is the level in proactive healthcare? How is medicine changing? We have hospitals in most of the world getting smaller and saying, we want you to self-monitor and measure at home, or do this from home. So we need to figure out a way to do that, because we don't necessarily have an answer to that right now in the long term from what we see. So that can be applied to how we interact with technology on a bigger scale. But that's one of the things I'm looking at, and how we do it at work is also that's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, really fascinating. Yeah, super cool.
And we're also speaking with a couple groups in the U.S. about specific professions, like the law profession, and moving towards like hybrid work and working from home and these types of things. And there it's really interesting because you have cultural aspects,
right.
the American culture of how things work, but then you also have like the law culture, right?
Yeah.
And it's really interesting if you start to kind of disseminate each one of those industries, how unique they are. So we design buildings like this one that is just gorgeous, based on our best attempt to get it right. But then there's so many complexities that fall underneath that.
Right.
And that's what I'm excited about uncovering more. Heather,
what are you inventing?
What am I working on?
Yeah. So maybe your what you're working on, and then your closing remarks as well.
Well, I'm working on some research right now that's not specifically related to the built environment, but more sort of high level, how we transition away from fossil fuels for energy, but also for certain materials. So that's really interesting. And then I'm also trying to put something together, although I don't know yet in what form, about this last 10 years of this rooftop garden, lightweight rooftop vegetable garden in Toronto, which has really interesting social and environmental impacts. So that's what I'm working on. And then also related to smart buildings, thinking a lot about impacts and doing literature reviews and reading up on how do we actually measure and quantify and qualify impacts in a meaningful way. So that's something that I've been thinking about a lot and researching a lot.
Yeah, and I think what we're working on with Heather, which I think is the next step, is that from that literature review, we're going to pull out the gaps. We're going to say, what are the most important things that should be researched and put open access and made available for everyone. And then look to the research ecosystem and say, hey, call for papers. Who wants to fill these gaps?
Nice.
And then we're going to bring those into the buildings and into our partner network. And we're going to do those researches. And then we're going to do some really amazing events to disseminate that knowledge, make sure that everybody is.
Yes.
Thank you guys so much. This was actually mind-blowing. I always feel so inadequate listening to the way you guys speak. But really, really terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And to our audience, thank you for joining us. Till the next time. We have our next event is next Tuesday at 4:00 Central European Time. And we have a number of energy sustainable technologies that are going to talk to us about, what should you be thinking about in this energy crisis? How can you make your building more optimally efficient? Thinking about metering, thinking about, AI-driven HVAC systems and BMS systems and this type of stuff. So we're really excited to hear from them, because I think it's a hot topic, and I think it's one that everybody is interested. So till then, Take care. Thank you very much.
Thank you.